if folks want to get a little closer, come a little closer in. I think we'll be all right. We're outside, right? So no one's going to get COVID or anything like that. So that'll be good. All right. So how about this? Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right? All right. So I wanted to start out, wanted to thank everyone who's spoken. You know, I want to thank our friends from the Schiller Institute for providing sound and having their speakers. I want to thank the John Brown volunteers who have been hitting the streets every day, you know, doing outreach and promoting the Center for Political Innovation and its message. I want to thank the New York City Bolivarian Circle and William Kamikaro for the important work they're doing, exposing the crimes of U.S. imperialism in Latin America. I want to thank our friends from the Young Communist League who are here. They're doing important work, doing important political education. I want to thank our friends from the Party of Communists who are here, right? Yeah. I want to thank our friends from all walks of life. I think we're one human family. So I want to acknowledge everybody who helped make this meeting a reality. And I wanted to start out my remarks by actually talking about something that I saw yesterday. I was on my way into the city to go to work, and I live in Brooklyn. And in my neighborhood, you know, the trains are kind of, they're like lower, right? They're in the ground, right? And the streets go over the trains. And there's actually, in my neighborhood, there's like a bridge kind of that goes over where, you know, if you're on the bridge, you can see the trains. But there are these cement walls. But there's actually some little holes that have developed in the cement walls. And so while I was walking to get on the N train and go to work, I'm walking by, and there are these holes in the walls. And there's this father with two kids. And the two kids are looking through the holes in the walls to see the trains come by. Right? And these two little kids, they're looking, peeking through the holes to see the trains that are coming by down below under the bridge. And when the train came by, when, you know, the same train that I see every day, the N train came by, they saw that train come, and these two little kids, they just jumped up like, yes! They were so excited to see that train come by. It was like the most exciting thing they'd ever seen. And it put a smile on my face. It really put a smile on my face because, you know, I take the N train every day. The train's not a big deal to me, but for them, it was a really big deal to see that train. And if you think about it, they're right. They're right. A train is a miracle. It really is. If you think about the fact that in just a few thousand years, human beings have gone from hunter-gatherers in the woods to space travel and iPhones and trains, it's a miracle. It really is a miracle what human beings have accomplished. You know, beavers, they've been building their beaver dams the same way for thousands of years. Ants, they've been building their ant farms the same way for thousands and thousands of years. But in just such a short time, this is how far human beings have come. Now, those kids were really excited about the N train in New York City. Imagine if they could see some of those high-speed railway they're making in China right now. Imagine if they could see that. They would be really blown away, wouldn't they? And that kind of optimism, understanding what makes human beings unique, understanding what separates human beings, that's an important part of Marxism. Friedrich Engels, he wrote a very important essay where he described the difference between humans and animals. And he said, in short, the animal merely uses its environment and brings about changes in it simply by its presence. Man, by his changes, makes it serve his ends and masters it. And this is the final essential distinction between man and other animals. And once again, it is labor that brings about this distinction. It's human labor that produces all wealth. Wealth is not created by speculation. Wealth is not created by Wall Street derivative rip-off schemes. It is the labor of human beings. It's the worker that creates. And the working class and the liberation of the working class is essential to everything that Marxists and revolutionaries strive for around the world. But I'm going to take a drink of water. Because I want to point out, when we talk about the achievements of humanity and this creative power of human beings, at the same time, we have to be aware of the danger of pessimism. I think pessimism, more than anything, is the greatest danger facing our generation. You look at the suicide rate right now. You look at the rate of opioid addiction. You look at the rate of drug use and such. I mean, it's pessimism that's hanging over us. And pessimism is very, 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 very dangerous. When people don't think that tomorrow is going to be better than today. When people don't think that there's a reason to wake up in the morning, this is the death of society, and this is dangerous. And optimism is an essential part of Marxism, and rejecting the pessimism that comes from the capitalist system, that comes from our ruling class, the depression and hopelessness that flows out of all of our iPhones and cell phones every day. Rejecting that is very essential. And I wanted to actually read, that forced me to think of something. You know, there's a lot of boomers who, they would make them memorize poems in school, and they had to memorize this poem I'm about to read. Now, they don't make kids memorize poems in school very much today, and in this case, that's probably a good thing, because this poem I'm going to read to you, while it might sound pretty, it kind of expresses that pessimism. The poem is, you've probably heard it before, you've probably heard people make fun of it at least. It's kind of a classic, 1913. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. Have folks ever heard that before? Very famous, written in 1913. Well, that's a pessimistic poem. It's saying that at the end of the day, human beings were not really creative. Poems are made by fools like me. It's looking to nature as triumphant. It's not celebrating the achievement of human beings. And that poem was written by Joyce Kilmer. And Joyce Kilmer, he was a reactionary. And he was associated with G.K. Chesterton and other distributist Roman Catholics and fascists that were emerging as a trend of historical pessimism. And he eventually, he was writing that, and that pessimism emerged as the modern age was giving birth to World War I. Right? And Joyce Kilmer, the author of that poem, was eventually killed in World War I. In 1918, he was shot in the head. And that poem was very much an expression of this belief that it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Human progress is not worth it. That at the end of the day, nature will triumph. Human beings are just another animal. There is no hope. It's a dark, sad, pessimistic poem. And I hear that same kind of dark, sad pessimism in our society right now. I hear it everywhere. I mean, everywhere you go, you hear that same kind of defeated tone. And it is widely promoted in our society. And you can understand why somebody was living at the time that World War I broke out. You can understand why they might feel that way. World War I was a horrendous war, right? 20 million workers sent to their deaths just so the imperialists of Britain and the imperialists of the United States and the imperialists of Germany and Austria and the Ottoman Empire could carve up the world for themselves. 20 million working people sent to their deaths. And Vladimir Lenin, a lot of people don't realize that Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Russian Revolution, was actually a pretty calm guy. He spoke with a very soft voice. He liked to play the piano. He was a calm fellow. But if you want to read some angry writing, read the writing that Lenin wrote about the outbreak of World War I. Because World War I wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for sellout leaders in the socialist movement who made it happen, who allowed it to happen, who swore they would never send working people to die in war. But when the guns of August roared, the Social Democrats and the Labour Party in Britain and so many of these socialist fake leaders sent the workers off to die in war. And Lenin was furious about this, and he vehemently screamed about it. He said that the Second International was a stinking corpse, and he wrote with such angry rage. And it's funny because I heard similar tone when I went to the Medicare for All march last Saturday, a week ago. I was at that Medicare for All march, something that, AOC says she's for, something that Bernie Sanders says he's for, and I was at that march, and I heard so many people who had given their money to Bernie Sanders, given their money to AOC and the squad, and felt like they had been sold out. And they were marching, and they had that same rage at people that speak in the name of socialism, but sell out the working class at the end of the day. And I heard that same kind of anger flowing through them. And yes, these are dark times. But we've been through dark times before. Lead up to World War I was particularly dark. But what came out of World War I? The Russian Revolution. And as a result of the Russian Revolution, one of the poorest countries in Europe at that time, an agrarian, impoverished, backward country, became an industrial superpower and industrialized and wiped out illiteracy and became the world's top producer of steel, and electrified the entire country, and brought running water to the whole country, and wiped out illiteracy. And then they defeated the Nazi invaders. And then they rebuilt their country again after that. And then they invented space travel. And then they put the first human being into orbit. Don't let anybody ever tell you socialism has failed. Don't let anybody ever tell you that. It was out of that darkness of World War I, out of that dark period, that some hope came to the world. And we Marxists, we understand that the world is constantly in a state of change. Many times I've articulated that by using the expression that A does not equal A. A does not equal A, because there's no way the first A can be the same as the second A, because the world is constantly in a state of change. Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, he famously said, "You never step into the same river twice." A does not equal A. You never step into the same river twice. And if you want any proof of that, look at China today. China used to be the sick man of Asia, one of the poorest countries in the world. And now China, at this point, they are the second largest economy in the world. 800 million people lifted out of poverty. The world's biggest telecommunications manufacturer. And this was all achieved because people took history into their own hands, because people engaged in action. You know, I talk about Mao Zedong and how Mao and the Chinese Communist Party, they first entered a strategic alliance with Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the founder of modern China. They joined an alliance with Dr. Sun Yat-sen, but Dr. Sun Yat-sen died, and Chiang Kai-shek took power. And Chiang Kai-shek didn't particularly want an alliance with the communists, so he started slaughtering the communists. So the communists fled to the countryside, and they started carving out liberated territory. And the Soviet Union and the Marxist movement had always said it was going to be industrial workers who make the revolution. But Mao had the brilliance to innovate and realize that in China it was going to be the peasantry, it was going to be the people in the rural areas who've been oppressed by the landlords. They would be the basis of the revolution. And so Mao, and they carved out liberated territory in the countryside, and they created something, many people don't even realize this, but in the 1930s they had something very briefly called the Chinese Soviet Republic. You can Google that, the Chinese Soviet Republic in the early 1930s. They had a whole territory, they declared a government, and so 1934, China teamed up with Germany. And who was running Germany at that time? The Nazis sent Hans von Seeckt, a general, to aid Chiang Kai-shek in helping to put down the Chinese Soviet Republic. And the Germans and the Chinese nationalists, they surrounded the Chinese Soviet Republic, and they crushed it. And Mao was forced to flee up into the mountains. And Mao fled up into the mountains. And I almost wish I could have been there in that moment. I really do. I wish I could have been there to say to Hans von Seeckt and Chiang Kai-shek and the reactionaries and the British Empire and the imperialists who were rejoicing, and they said, that's the last we're ever going to hear of Mao. That's the last we're ever going to hear of communism in China. I wish I could have been there to look at them and smile and say, enjoy yourselves now. But I've got a feeling in a couple of years you're not going to be so happy, because just as Mao is going up that mountain defeated, Mao is coming down from the mountain, and Mao is going to be 10 times stronger. And that hike up into the mountains, that you thought was his defeat, that hike up into the mountains is going to be known as the Long March. And it's going to be epically portrayed through history. There are going to be best-selling books in America like Red Star over China, glorifying Mao and the Chinese Red Army and what they're achieving, fighting the Japanese invaders. There's even going to be a Hollywood movie called Gung Ho. You ever heard of this movie? Gung Ho. It's a Hollywood movie about a U.S. Marine Corps general who adopts Mao's fighting style to fight the Japanese invaders. And the phrase Gung Ho is going to become part of the English language. You've probably heard that before. People say someone's real gung ho, right? Well, what does gung ho mean? Gung ho is a slogan of the Chinese Communist Party. It means all together, all for one. That's where it comes from. And the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Liberation Army, they're the heroes of the whole world. And they're the ones who started China on the course of becoming what it is today, of becoming a superpower, of raising millions of people out of poverty, of industrializing. Yeah. Mao came down from that mountain. A does not equal A, and you never step into the same river twice. And I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again, because we need to remember where we came from. As much as I think all of us here are brilliant, we ourselves, we did not invent Marxism. We did not invent communism. People have been doing this for years. People have been talking this way for years. One of the best experiences I ever had is when I was 19 years old and I first got involved with a socialist group. I drove up with a comrade to Buffalo. And we went to Buffalo and we went to the home of an 80-year-old woman who is now deceased. And I sat in her living room and she got out the photo album. And she showed us photos of the bad old days, McCarthyism. She showed us pictures of how in Buffalo the steel plant had fired every worker who was a member of the Communist Party. And so she and a few other people, they went to the steel mill and they protested. Not for communism, not for revolution, but for political freedom. They said steel workers have the right to join whatever political party they want. Democrats, Republicans, whatever. And so she went to this demonstration, and the next day, they printed the names and addresses of every single person who went to that demonstration. They printed their names and addresses in the newspaper. And she was a teacher, and she got called down to the principal's office, and there were 2 FBI men there. And they had photos of her at this demonstration. They said, "Is this you at this communist demonstration?" She said, "Yes." They said, "You're fired." So then she got a job in another elementary school, was teaching. One day the FBI showed up, called down to the office. "Is this you in these photographs? Are you a communist?" She was fired. And that was McCarthyism. A lot of people don't know that in McCarthyism, in 1951, they passed a law called the McCarran Internal Security Act of 1951. You can look this up. It was a law that gave the U.S. Department of Justice the ability to put 2 million people in concentration camps. The Department of Justice was to assemble a list of 2 million subversives, and if there was a national emergency, they would be put into concentration camps. You can Google this. This was a real law that was passed. Communists were unable to find jobs. They were hounded. But, the best of them didn't sell out, and they didn't surrender. And, it's interesting. It's interesting to think about that, because it got ugly. It went beyond just going after communists. Pretty soon, the capitalists were accusing each other of being communists. Joe McCarthy claimed the U.S. Army was secretly controlled by communists. They had these witch hunt House Un-American Activities Committees hearings in Congress that were horrendous. And I almost wish I could be there and say to Joe McCarthy and J. Edgar Hoover and the head of the FBI and the witch hunters, I wish I could say to them, have your fun, enjoy yourselves. But I've got a feeling you're not going to be too happy when Joe McCarthy drinks himself to death and is a national disgrace for his demagogy and lies. And I've got a feeling you're not going to be too happy when all across this country people are marching for civil rights, an issue that the Communist Party has been talking about that mainstream media has been ignoring. I got a feeling you're not going to be too happy when the U.S. imperialists try to have a war with Vietnam and people light their draft cards on fire and say, "Hell no, we won't go," and start waving the flag of the Vietnamese. Sure, enjoy yourselves now, Joe McCarthy. Enjoy yourselves now, J. Edgar Hoover. But I got a feeling you're not going to be so happy because A does not equal A. And you never stepped into the same river twice. Mao came down from the mountain, and Joe McCarthy drank himself to death. Now, obviously we're talking history now. Why is any of this relevant? Well, history is only relevant. History is only relevant because it helps us understand the present. By understanding the past, we can understand the future. That's what ideology is. There's a lot of talk of postmodernism these days. They say ideology is not important, right? Well, ideology is important. I want you all to imagine that you were driving down the road. Imagine you were driving down the road, and when you're driving down the road, you know where you're going, you know where you came from, and you know how you're getting there, so you can drive down the road. But imagine that you were driving down the road, and suddenly you didn't know where you were going. You didn't know where you were coming from, and you didn't know where you were going. What would you do? You would stop the car. You would stop the car. Well, ideology is what propels people. It tells people where they're going, tells people where they came from, tells people how they're getting there. That's ideology. And ideologies are something human beings have built for centuries, for thousands of years. Every society has its religion, its beliefs, its ideology. But what makes Marxism different than any other ideology is because all other ideologies insist that they are eternal. They insist that the way things are is the way they will always be. Right? I used to argue with people that were opposed to gay marriage. They used to have a bumper sticker, and it would say, marriage equals one man plus one woman, and it would have a Bible verse. I'd walk up to them, I'd say, that's funny. How many wives did Abraham have again? How many wives did Moses have again? No, there is no permanent way the family is structured. There is no permanent gender roles. Society is always changing. And the same can be said for the state. You know, if you thought monarchies were just the natural way of being, well, I guess you would be a little bit confused nowadays that most countries have abolished monarchies. There is nothing permanent in the universe. All that is solid melts into air. And it's with Marxism and dialectical materialism that we can understand that. As I said before, A does not equal A. You never step into the same river twice. And so it's with that science we can look at the present. Because right now, the capitalists have gotten so good at producing things. They've gotten so good at making iPhones and iPads. They've gotten so good at churning out products. They've gotten so good at pumping oil out of the ground that there's poverty. In systems of the past, people were hungry because there wasn't enough food. But only under capitalism are people hungry because there's too much food. In systems of the past, people were homeless because there was a shortage of housing. But only under capitalism are people hungry, or are people homeless because there is too much housing. Capitalism is a highly irrational system where production is carried out for profit, not for the benefit of society. And it leads to all kinds of crises. And the fact now that there are millions and millions of people who have basically been declared to be expendable by this system. They need fewer and fewer workers, but the population is expanding, and they don't know what to do about this. There's an old wobbly song, I think Solidarity Forever, right? In the song Solidarity Forever, one of the verses of Solidarity Forever, they say, you know, what is it? It's we who plowed the prairies, built the cities where they trade, dug the mines and built the workshops, endless miles of railroad laid. But now we stand outcast and starving amid the wonders we have made. What's that about? It's about the fact that the working class built this world. The working class labored and built this world, but the capitalists no longer have a place for us in it. As they make production more and more efficient, there's less and less room for the worker. And under capitalism, the worker's only value is selling his labor to a capitalist. And so we have a situation where there are millions of hungry people. There's a market glutted with products that cannot be sold. This is a crisis. You know, when I was in Russia, I went to the Baldy Discussion Club, and I got to hear from Jack Ma, the billionaire Alibaba founder, also a member of the Chinese Communist Party. And he pointed out, he said, you know, World War I came after a huge leap in technology. And World War II came after a huge leap in technology. He understood that because under capitalism, technological progress leads to economic collapse. Under capitalism. But under socialism, a system where the banks and the factories and the major industries and the centers of economic power are organized to serve public good and not profits, where you get rid of the anarchy of production or profits in command, you can overcome that. And right now, all over the world, we're seeing a socialist alternative. China's economy, where the banks are controlled by the state and operated according to 5-year economic plans, where there's huge amounts of state-run industries, where even private companies are forced to cooperate with the Communist Party's overall central plan. In China, they're not having this problem. Technology advances, goods are produced, and the population gets better, and living standards go up because profits are not in command. And this is the difference between capitalism and socialism. Under capitalism, profits are in command. Under socialism, human reason and rational planning can be applied to the economy, and we get beyond the irrationality of the market. And it's socialism that made Russia into a modern industrial country that could defeat the Nazis. It's socialism that made China into a global superpower. And it's socialism that has made Cuba a small island that has been barricaded economically. Despite everything that Cuba is up against, they've been able to provide an amazing healthcare system and have a higher life expectancy than any other people in Latin America. I walked through a neighborhood in Venezuela, in central Caracas. I walked through a neighborhood where every single house that had been built by an interest-free loan provided by the Venezuelan state. The reason they hate Venezuela is not because of human rights. It's not because of, corruption. The reason they hate Venezuela is because Venezuela used to be the property of ExxonMobil and BP and Shell, but then Hugo Chavez got in there and asserted state control over the oil. And he started using the oil to build schools and hospitals. You know, when Chavez first came to office, there were only 12 universities in Venezuela. Now there are 32 universities in Venezuela. When Chavez came into office, there was roughly 20 to 30% illiteracy in Venezuela. Now illiteracy in Venezuela has been wiped out. And that's why they want to crush the Bolivarian Revolution. That's why they want to crush the Cuban Revolution. That's why there's a trade war against China. This is what it's about. The imperialists and their system is outmoded. This system of production organized to make profits for a few, it doesn't work anymore. Capitalism cannot handle, it simply cannot tolerate the new level of technology that has been developed. When you talk about 3D printers, when you talk about the amazing things that artificial intelligence can do, capitalism can't handle that. And so we're entering a prolonged economic crisis. And if you listen to the imperialists, what is their solution to this economic crisis? What is their solution to it? They say, oh, everyone just needs to be poorer. Climate change. We all got to have less, It was fun, but, we've gone too far. Everyone has too much. And so we just got to drive down living standards. And we got to cut, government spending. We got to have austerity. We got to cut the jobs of government workers. We got to get rid of public education. And everyone just needs to get used to having less. On the right, it's austerity and libertarianism. On the left, it's eco-Malthusianism. But they're two faces of the same coin. They say the way we deal with this situation, the way we deal with this prolonged economic crisis, is we make everybody poorer. Well, I want everyone to go look back. What was the first ecological crisis we ever had in human history? What was it? It was when, after we'd been hunting and gathering for tens of thousands of years, there was a scarcity because we got too good at hunting and gathering. We developed sticks and rocks. We were too good at hunting and gathering. There was a shortage of animals to kill. There was a shortage of fruits and nuts to gather. So how did we solve that first ecological crisis? Did we all have less? Is that how we solved it? No. We solved it by moving to a higher mode of production, by adopting farming and the domestication of animals and the growing of crops. The way we solve crises like this is by advancing, by moving forward. It's by human innovation, getting to a higher mode of production. You have to solve problems by going forward, not by going backward. And right now, they're talking about building a low-wage police state. We got Kamala Harris. She was the California district attorney who destroyed the lives of thousands of people for smoking marijuana, who basically tried to block evidence so she could execute an innocent man. She is the prison industrial complex, and she's the vice president. And we had, Donald Trump, and he was pushing that anti-immigrant bigotry. He said he was going to stop the wars, and he nearly got us to World War III by murdering Qasem Soleimani, escalating tensions with Iran in the Middle East, starting a trade war with China. Congress, they were investigating the January 6th events. Well, we can all agree that what happened on January 6th was awful, no question about it. But one thing that's not being discussed, that crowd on January 6th, it wasn't simply, conservative average Americans who were there. Let's talk about who else was in that crowd. On January 6th, when Donald Trump had his racist rally, his, Stop the Steal rally, who was there? They had busloads of Miami Cubans. The same people that are marching now to try to bring down Fidel Castro were in Trump's crowd. And who else did they have? They had the Falun Gong, this cult from China that runs Epoch Times, anti-Chinese, anti-communist fanatics. They had supporters of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party, loads of Israeli flags in that crowd. Furthermore, they had right-wing Koreans in that crowd. And when you really look at January 6th, the situation is this. All over the world, when countries have been trying to break free from capitalism and move towards socialism, the United States has been backing and arming the extremists and fanatics and right-wingers and fascists who want to stop it. And part of the way we've been bribing those folks to do the dirty work of U.S. imperialism is by giving them visas and welcoming them to the United States. And on January 6th, it seems like what happened was that they've been filling the United States up with snakes and spiders for so many years, and it looks like all the snakes and spiders we've been filling up our country with, all these anti-communist extremists and fanatics, Ukrainian neo-Nazis, Shah supporters from the old Pahlavi monarchy in Iran, it looks like some of the snakes and spiders we've been filling our country up with, these anti-communist extremists, they've been breaking out of their cages. And they've been causing problems right here in the homeland. And that's part of January 6th they'll never talk about. They want to make it sound like that crowd was just a bunch of right-wing, conservative, average American working folks. They don't want to talk about the fact that these right-wing extremist immigrant constituencies that the USA coddles, the anti-Cuba, Miami Gusano folks, they don't want to talk about the fact that they were a big part of that crowd. Well, they were. But at the end of the day, I want to make one thing clear. I just want to end my remarks by clearing up one big misconception. Because a lot of people think that communists are advocates of violence. They think communists want to go out and engage in violence and terrorism. That's wrong. Responsible revolutionaries have always advocated a peaceful transition to socialism. They've always advocated that through the democratic process, through organizing peaceful movements, we see the election of a working class, popular front majority that can move toward changing U.S. society. Always responsible revolutionaries have advocated it. And when violent revolutions have happened, those violent revolutions happened not because the communists wanted it, but because the capitalists want it. Because the billionaires and the ruling class and the czars and the Shanghai sheiks of the world want it. They won't allow the democratic process to go forward. Working people don't want violence. Working class people are the ones that have to go and fight their ugly wars. It's working class people that have violence and police brutality and terrorism in their neighborhoods, sometimes in their homes. Working class people don't want violence. Working class people want a peaceful transition. But when violence happens, it's because the capitalists choose it. You know, Abraham Lincoln, he didn't want a war. But because he got elected, because he was going to restrain the slaveholders, he wasn't even going to abolish slavery. He just wanted to restrain the slaveholders. No new slave states. No cooperation with their fugitive slave laws. Well, the slave plantation owners responded to Abraham Lincoln's election, his peaceful democratic election, with violence. And so, what did Abraham Lincoln do? He built a coalition that included Harriet Tubman, the first woman to ever lead soldiers into battle in the United States. A coalition that included abolitionists, a coalition that included Frederick Douglass, a coalition that included Marxists. You know, August Willich, a communist, was a brigadier general in the Union Army. And they built that coalition, and they defeated the slaveholders. And in school, they call it the Civil War. But Marxists have always called the U.S. Civil War the Second American Revolution, because that's what it was. It was the Second American Revolution, the overturning of the slave system in the South. And Karl Marx was writing for the newspaper of this city, the New York Tribune. He was their London correspondent. And he spoke of Abraham Lincoln in glowing terms and called him the single-minded son of the working class. Karl Marx was very involved in the struggle to defeat slavery in the United States. And the Marxist movement of the United States, of German-American immigrants, they were big and they were part of it. Now, I also wanted to mention, you know, is Joey still here? Oh, he's over there. Well, you know, this group that they have, it's the John Brown Volunteers. Who was John Brown? You know, a lot of people ask us that when we go out. Who was John Brown? Well, John Brown was an American who was opposed to slavery. And he led an anti-slavery uprising at Harper's Ferry. And John Brown is very much an inspiration to so many progressive people. You know, John Brown, they would ask him why he was so committed to opposing slavery. And he would say, because of the Golden Rule. He would say, one should do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And if I were held in slavery, I would want people to revolt and fight for my freedom. And it was pretty simple. But yet, he gave his life for it. He revolted. And when they executed John Brown for leading the uprising at Harper's Ferry, they had to practically send the whole U.S. military out there to protect the execution because they were so afraid that there would be some kind of attempt to rescue him. The whole army practically had to be sent out, you know, to oversee the execution of John Brown. That's who we are as Americans. I am so sick and tired of Republicans and conservatives and right-wingers and liberals trying to tell us who we are as Americans. Tell us that their system of profits and command, their system of greed, their beliefs in postmodernism and that there is no truth, that somehow that is what it means to be an American. We, the people of the United States, we have a progressive side to our history. Yes, there's many ugly things in American history, many ugly wars, slavery, colonialism, genocide of the native people, segregation and oppression. But while all those evil things were going on, people were fighting back. People were resisting. And those people that stood against those wars, those people who stood against racism, those people who stood against empire and genocide, they are just as much a part of the history of this country as the imperialists and the warmongers. And I'm sick and tired of how they have hijacked what it means to be an American and tried to tell us that our identity as Americans is tied in with their evil system. There is a bold history of Americans fighting for justice. In fact, the first person to use the word socialism in the English language was Robert Owen, and he lived in Indiana, and he actually set up a commune in Indiana called New Harmony. It was a commune in Indiana. You know, I bet you didn't know this, but the Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist, Edward Bellamy. And Edward Bellamy, not only was he a socialist, but he was also a Baptist minister. He was a Baptist minister. And, you know, it's interesting because Earlier this week, Keaton and I, we were out on the street. Keaton's one of our John Brown volunteers. Sometimes he wears his cowboy hat. He's took off his cowboy hat for the moment. But we were out, and we were handing out some socialist literature and such. And we ran into a young man who was associated with one of these Baptist fundamentalist churches. And he said, I'm not interested in socialism. I'm a Christian. And so we pulled out a copy of the King James Bible, and we read him Acts verses 4:32, where Jesus Christ instructs his followers to hold all things in common and to not let anyone be poor. And so we had a back and forth argument where he was insisting that as a Christian you had to believe in capitalism. But if you read the teachings of Jesus Christ, that the last shall be first and the first shall be last, that none shall be without, that the working people and those who create the wealth are the most holy. If you read the teachings of the Bible, it's very, very hard to be a defender of a system that lets children be hungry, of a system that puts money ahead of morality and human decency. So it was an interesting conversation. But when I look out at what's going on here in the United States, it's abundantly clear to me that we are heading for a big moment of reckoning. The people want something different. Some people thought Donald Trump was going to fix things, and that clearly didn't happen. Some people were hoping that Bernie Sanders would get in and he would fix things, but that wasn't allowed to happen. And people still want things to change. Well, things are going to change. Things will change. A does not equal A. You never step into the same river twice. Mao came down from the mountain. Joe McCarthy drank himself to death. And we, at the Center for Political Innovation, are trying to educate people, trying to spread truth in a world of lies, trying to change the beliefs that people have. We've been lied to. We've been lied to about Venezuela. We've been lied to about Cuba. We've been lied to about Russia and China. We've been lied to about their capitalist system, their system that grinds countries into poverty. Well, for a long time, you could say that average Americans benefited from imperialism. Well, those days are over. You look at Pennsylvania, you look at Ohio, you look at Michigan, the same thing that these imperialists have done to Africa and Asia and Latin America, they're now starting to do to the imperialist homeland. They don't need a labor aristocracy of well-paid workers. They don't need a middle class in the homeland. They're coming for us. And now is the time to stand in solidarity with the people of the world against imperialism. We need a government of action. Nick, come up here with that, sorry. Now, Nick is part of a student club called Students and Youth for a New America. Yeah. And one of the slogans that we've used in that student club is, we need a government of action that will fight for working families. A government of action, right? This notion that the government is best, that governs least. The government should just sit back, the economy takes care of itself. No. We need a government of action. A 4-point plan to rescue the economy. Step 1, we need a mass infrastructure program. America needs to be rebuilt. They need to hire the unemployed, hire the young people, put them to work rebuilding this country. New universities, new power plants, new schools, new high-speed railway. And on top of that, we say that America's oil, America's natural gas, America's coal, America's timber, these natural resources, they should be the property of all Americans. They shouldn't belong to ExxonMobil and Rockefeller and Carnegie and DuPont. The American people should have a right to the wealth that exists under their feet. Call for public control of natural resources. Step 3 would be public control of banking, right? Put the lending of money and the assigning of credit strategically into the hands of the state. And step 4 would be the creation of the enactment of an economic bill of rights. An economic bill of rights, like Roosevelt proposed, the right to jobs, the right to housing. And that 4-point plan, while in itself it wouldn't be socialism, it would be a step. You would have to push back so much capitalist power that in order to enact that program, you'd have to push back so much capitalist power that a working class government wouldn't be very far off. Yeah. Now, there are 2 other issues that we have policy solutions to deal with. The first of those is climate change. How are we going to deal with climate change, right? There's all this talk about climate change. And the solution that we're hearing from the major voices representing the environmental movement is they just want to make everyone poorer. They want to make everyone poorer. They say we all have to have less. Well, like I said, the solution to climate change is getting off of fossil fuels and not replacing them with solar panels and windmills, but replacing it with fusion energy. Russia, China, they have called for global cooperation for fusion energy. And so we say it is time for a joint operation between all the major countries in the world to construct one facility where all the greatest fusion energy scientists are sent. And we call that Fusion City. And if we're going to defeat climate change, Fusion City must be built. Fusion City now! 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 Build Fusion City. If you want to deal with climate change, build Fusion City. Build Fusion City. That is the answer. It is time to get higher than fossil fuels, not lower. It's time to defeat fossil fuels and replace it with a much more efficient energy system. If you look at what China's doing right now, what they're doing with their artificial suns, the helium-3 they're getting from the moon, this is a big deal. We should be part of it. The whole global community should be working for fusion energy. It shouldn't be an issue of competition. It should be a united effort with all humanity working to get beyond fossil fuels. Another issue that we've talked about is immigration, right? What is the right wing? What do they want to do about immigration? Well, the right wing, they say the answer to immigration is that basically we have to build a big giant wall and we have to terrorize immigrant communities with ICE raids. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. That would be the best gift you could ever give to MS-13. Those gangs thrive. When immigrant communities are afraid to call the police, when people can't cross the border and have to get smuggled across with gangs, that's where these criminal gangs thrive. Terrorizing immigrant communities, making immigrant children afraid their parents might not be there when they get home from school. That's not gonna help anything. But what does the left wing offer? What do they offer? Well, they just offer, compassion, but they don't really change anything. Kamala Harris, our new border czar, she's not really offering any solution. Well, we have a solution at the Center for Political Innovation. Our solution is called the Sandino-Zapata Economic Corridor. The United States and Mexico and China and Nicaragua need to team up to bring emergency economic development to Central America. If you want to stop the humanitarian crisis that is causing people to pile into our border, we need to go to Guatemala, we need to go to Honduras and provide jobs and housing and education. We need to wipe out the drug gangs, and we need economic development. Give people something to live for. Give people economic opportunities, and they won't be desperately piling onto the border. And, Sandino was the leader of the Nicaraguan Revolution. Emiliano Zapata was the leader of the Mexican Revolution. So we would call it the Sandino-Zapata Economic Corridor. High-speed railway, jobs, economic development in the southwest of the United States, in Mexico, in Honduras, in Guatemala, all the way down to Nicaragua. A joint project of economic development. And of course, there are going to be some people that say, well, can't the free market take care of that? Can't the free market just take care of that? Why do you need the government involved in that? The free market can take care of that. Well, the free market isn't taking care of it. What we need is a government of action that will take care of it, that will provide jobs and housing and education to the people that are suffering. We need state power. You want to go back further. What was the beginning of the Enlightenment? What was the beginning of the modern era in Europe? During feudalism, the notion was that human beings existed to serve those who were above them, right? The idea was that peasants, they existed to serve the landlords. Commoners, they existed to serve the king. But a beautiful awakening took place in Europe when suddenly there was a shift in consciousness. We suddenly started to get the music of Bach and Beethoven. We got the work of Leonardo da Vinci. We got some amazing artwork. We got Shakespeare and his poetry. Where did all this come from? How did all this come from the Dark Age? It came from a shift in consciousness. There started to be a belief that the state, the government, has an obligation to serve the people. It was a shift in consciousness that the state, the government, is not simply something to be worshipped, but rather it has an obligation to its population, the notion of statecraft. Well, our leaders here in the United States have forgotten about statecraft. They've forgotten about it, right? If you're a parent and your child doesn't have proper clothing and it's wintertime and they're coming to school without proper clothes, you can be arrested. Why? You can be charged with criminal neglect. Well, I charge the government of the United States with criminal neglect at this moment. Criminal neglect. Our country is falling apart. Roads are crumbling. Schools are crumbling. There's an opioid epidemic. People are dying. People are hungry. People are homeless. People don't have jobs. And they're focused on bombing and destroying countries around the world instead of feeding Americans. I charge the government of the United States with criminal neglect. We at the Center for Political Innovation say it's time that instead of having a government that sits on its hands, what Roosevelt called do-nothing government, it's time that we have a government of action. that fights for working families. So I want to thank everybody for coming out. It's been a great meeting. I want to thank everyone who spoke and gave a presentation, everyone who came. And I hope that you'll get involved with the Center for Political Innovation and our future activism and our future educational events. You can check out our website, cpiusa.org. We just had a great conference in Pennsylvania. We're going to be out on the West Coast pretty soon having another conference. We've got people all over the country. We're all over social media. We're trying to save this country from the nightmare of capitalism. I am not a socialist because I want to destroy America. I'm a socialist because I want to save America. I want to save America from the greed of imperialism and the greed and destruction of the billionaire banker class, from the prison industrial complex, from wars and poverty and destruction. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Caleb. And I want to thank everybody for attending.